Well, it was only a matter of time until the honeymoon period with Kamala Harris would come to an end. And with just over 2 months to go until Americans cast their vote, it looks like that day has come. Looking at the latest polling that is out today, Donald Trump is either even or well ahead of Kamala Harris in 7 crucial battleground states. According to a Trafalgar Group survey, Donald Trump leads Kamala Harris 47 to 45% in Pennsylvania, and he's ahead 47 to 46% in Wisconsin. Now, a separate survey by Insider Advantage shows that Donald Trump is leading Kamala Harris by 1 point in Arizona, Nevada, and North Carolina. Now, we know that both campaigns are targeting the independent and undecided voters in key states, and anything can happen between now and November 5. But the latest figures that show that support for Kamala Harris is slipping comes just days after she finally sat down for an interview with CNN's Dana Bash, which was more of a puff piece than anything else. Yet Kamala Harris still struggled to get her message out clearly.
But first to the Kamala Harris interview, which ended up looking more like a campaign ad than a hard-hitting interview.
Welcome on board. Thank you. It's good to see you.
This is not where Vice President Harris thought she would be.
We're going to Georgia. Yes. 7th trip there this year for me.
A surprise nominee for president just months from Election Day. Set in motion after a stunning debate.
Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Some within your own party are wondering if President Biden should even step aside. What do you say to that?
There was a slow start, but it was a strong finish.
And then an extraordinary decision.
I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
Philadelphia!
What usually takes years of planning, coming together in a matter of weeks.
Tim Wall!
After a historic nomination at the convention in Chicago,
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
the Harris Walls ticket is now pushing forward with the shortest presidential campaign in modern history.
What did you hear from voters here?
People are very optimistic.
We join them on the trail as they visited the battleground of Georgia. Just 68 days from the election.
And then after the first break, they ran this puff piece.
As voters are getting to know Kamala Harris, they want answers on how she will make their lives better. She heard that here at Sandfly Barbecue in Savannah.
What we're going to do to increase access to capital for small businesses, I'll be rolling out next week. Part of what we're going to be doing in terms of a tax credit.
On the trail, she talks about her experience, years in the courtroom as a district attorney and eventually California's attorney general. She wants to reframe the contest as the prosecutor versus the felon.
I know Donald Trump's type. I've been dealing with them my whole career.
The former president is turning to a well-defined playbook of personal attacks.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black.
And in just 12 days, the nominees will meet face-to-face for the first time.
She's not a good debater. She's not a smart person. She doesn't want to debate.
If you've got something to say, say it to my face.
CNN is a joke for pretending that this would be a legitimate effort to probe Harris. That editing wasn't appropriate on either of those moments. And when CNN's Dana Bash did initially ask some substantive questions, there was no follow-up and there was just rambling and off-track answers. Harris was asked about why she backflipped on fracking, but there wasn't much pushback.
2019, I believe, at a town hall, you said you were asked, would you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking on your first day in office? And you said, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So yes. So it changed in that campaign?
In 2020, I made very clear where I stand. We are in 2024, and I've not changed that position, nor will I going forward. I kept my word, and I will keep my word.
Harris had previously called for illegal immigration to be decriminalised, but when she responded to this fact, the reporter just let her ramble.
Another question about something that you said in 2019 when you first ran. There was a debate. You raised your hand when asked whether or not the border should be decriminalized. Do you still believe that?
I believe there should be consequence. We have laws that have to be followed and enforced that address and deal with people who cross our border illegally, and there should be consequence. And let's be clear, in this race, I'm the only person who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations who traffic in guns, drugs, and human beings. I'm the only person in this race who actually served a border state as Attorney General to enforce our laws, and I would enforce our laws as president going forward. I recognize the problem.
In truth, Harris is part of an administration which has an out-of-control illegal immigration issue, and the journalist failed to press further on this fact. And after these more serious questions, it got super weird, fluffy, and very promotional. Rather than digging into her record of policies, they started asking about the amazing moment Biden stepped aside for her.
And we have some never-before-shared details about the phone call that changed everything between President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris.
Really? That's your big exclusive? Well, it better be good. Let's check it out.
My family was staying with us, and including my baby nieces, and we had just had pancakes and, you know, Auntie, can I have more bacon? Yes, I'll make you more bacon. And then we were sitting down to do a puzzle. And the phone rang, and it was Joe Biden. And he told me what he had decided to do. And I asked him, are you sure? And he said yes. And that's how I learned about it.
Wow, compelling stuff. Harris has been hiding from hard-hitting interviews since launching her campaign, and this was actually an opportunity for CNN to really test her candidacy. Instead, it is clear that this joke of a network simply wanted to promote her. It wasn't journalism, it was an endorsement. Well, joining me on the show this week is Sky News host Caleb Bond and Radio 2CC Stephen Senatiempo. Now, let's start with you, Caleb. I mean, could that have been more of a flagrant endorsement of this person than what we just saw?
I don't even know how to respond to that, to be perfectly honest. I mean, remember during the 2016 campaign, CNN was derided as the Clinton News Network. Well, perhaps in this case they should change to KNN and be the Kamala News Network, because what I just watched there had more mayo on it than a bad burger from McDonald's. Seriously. They have set her up as though she's the second coming of Jesus, and we've got to have Kamala Harris, otherwise the US is going to fall apart, etc., etc. What you would expect from an interview with any presidential candidate is a sit-down without the theatrics of all the production value. I mean, they've gone for like it's a doco that you're going to watch on Netflix or something, right? You don't want the production value. You want a hard-hitting journalist sitting in front of someone who's asking to be elected President of the United States, asking hard questions for an hour straight. You want to see the candidate squirm and duck and dive and work out where they sit on things. And that's not what you got. You got, as you pointed out, a bit of a puff piece and what seemed to be a promotional bit of material. I'm sure Kamala will now be using it on all of her social media because, you know, why spend money making your own stuff when CNN will do it for you?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it was a pre-recorded interview, Stephen, as well. So they've had a lot of time to go in there and polish and edit. The way that they threw to various clips and sound bites was very strategic. But to Caleb's point, you've got somebody that wants to essentially be the most powerful person in the world, and nobody wants to test her. Nobody has the courage to point it back against her policies.
Well, there's a couple of things here. I was actually talking about this on my radio program this morning, the fact that American politicians are not very good when they front the media as opposed to Australian politicians who do it far more often. And I made the point that, as a talkback radio announcer, I can get the Prime Minister on my program from time to time, whereas that will never happen in the United States. They're very, very polished when they make a speech that's been written by somebody else and they've got an auto cue, but you put them in front of somebody without a script and they're absolutely hopeless. But getting back to the point here, we all knew CNN was going to go this way. I mean, the fact that it was edited down from, somewhere in the vicinity of an hour to 18 minutes tells you everything you need to know about this, that it was always going to be a promotional piece rather than a hard-hitting interview.
Yeah, and I knew it was, Stephen, and I mean, Caleb, let's bring you in here. I knew it was going to be bad, but the way that they were segueing this music, the crying from the crowd, at one point they threw up a photograph and they made it, this historic photograph where she's kind of silhouetted by a young woman and tried to make it out as if this was the greatest thing that was happening. I just cannot believe... I mean, this is why CNN is losing viewers, isn't it? Surely people watch this, and the average American, the average person around the world watching this election, they have to understand that this is deceptive.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it may well play well to the CNN audience, but the CNN audience was going to vote for Kamala anyway, so I don't know that it's done her any favours. And of course, the strategy you seem to be seeing from a media perspective here is much the same as Biden in 2020, which is, put Kamala in the bunker, don't put her in front of the media because she will slip up. And we know what she's like. I mean, if you see her in free-form interviews, or not interviews, but, she's on a stage and talking, like, she is nuts. Absolutely nuts, and that's what they're trying to protect her from. So she does the rallies with scripts and auto cue, etc. This is the only interview she's agreed to so far, and she had to have her emotional support candidate next to her while she did it. It is so staged managed as to be ridiculous, and that is one of the areas, and I know Trump's in trouble in the polls at the moment, but that is one of the areas where Trump really has an advantage over Kamala, because he's not afraid of doing interviews and he's not afraid of going off script. And so as the campaign progresses, if we don't see her do any more interviews, she will hope that that is an advantage, but it gives space for Trump to go in and suck up, use the vacuum and suck up all the space that Kamala refuses to fill. Yeah, exactly. And look, Stephen, Kamala Harris's performance, we can critique it all day, but where I actually get a bit angry about this is this journalist, Dana Bash. She had the opportunity to probe. And I really think that you owe your viewers, you owe them to probe somebody that's about to take all of this power. She is the front runner now. And yes, maybe a few weeks ago, Donald Trump was in the lead, but the polls are saying she's likely going to be the next leader of America. And we're just sitting here just waving her through. I just find it unconscionable.
Yeah, but you've got to look at the context of it, Jack. I mean, you think back to the 2019 election when Scott Morrison was running, and, and I'm not particularly a Scott Morrison fan, but the media was en masse saying he cannot win this election, he's gone, it's going to be a Bill Shorten government. Then he proved them wrong, and many people in the media here hated that, and they never forgave him for proving them wrong. It didn't matter what his policies were, didn't matter what his performance was, he proved us wrong and we're going to get him. Well, Trump did the same thing in 2020. And they are out to get him because he proved them wrong. Now, I wish Trump was more statesmanlike and I wish he was different than he was. And he's very combative and all of that. But ultimately, his biggest crime is he proved the media wrong and they're going to get him back for it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, Trump has labelled this interview boring. And in journalism, that's maybe the biggest sin that you can commit if you're an anchor and you have that opportunity. And Caleb, I mean, some of those moments are just nauseating where it's like, oh, tell us about when Joe called you and changed the world, this coup essentially, where they've forced him to step down and everything's just through these rose-coloured glasses.
And this is the thing, right? So you can do an interview like that, right? And so here at Sky News...
But not the first, not the very first interview that she's done.
But my issue is that they've dressed it up as a journalistic interview, right? So if you're going on with a host who clearly leans to one side and that's what their program is, you know what you're going to get out of it. I mean, if someone's interviewed by me on Sky News, they kind of know which way I'm going to go. Sometimes you don't know which way I'm going to go, but you kind of know which way I'm going to go with it, right? But what you expect out of a presidential interview, particularly the first one, as you point out, is hard-hitting journalism, and that's not what this was. It was an opinion piece as opposed to a piece of journalism. Decide which lane you're in and stick to it.
Yeah, and the production value behind it, it was honestly akin to a campaign ad. It was bad.
You've been CEO for a bit over 3 years now. Over that time, has it been easier or harder to do business in both Australia and the United States?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question. Look, I think the gas industry has gone through a pretty tough time here in Australia between regulatory changes, court cases, protesters. We've had a bit of a tough patch. I think people are starting to come to a realization, though, that for Australia to have a prosperous future, that prosperous future needs gas. And whilst we all want to decarbonise and we all want more renewables, we've got to figure out some way to get emissions down as well as keeping the lights on, and gas is going to be part of that solution. So it feels like things are in a little bit better place now than they were maybe a year ago, but I'm not going to bank my wins yet.
And then looking at the states, there's obviously the election coming up in a few months' time. Is there going to be any impact on your business potentially, depending on who wins?
We're watching the policy positions of both parties really closely to understand what they might do. The Republicans, of course, have a very pro-oil and gas mindset. But if you look at the facts, you would see that oil and gas production in the U.S. grew more under Biden than it did under the first Trump administration. So at the end of the day, a lot of our ability to do our business comes down to states and comes down to some of the continuity at the highest level in policy. So we feel pretty good about our ability to continue to do our work in the U.S., but we'll all be watching the election closely.
And then just looking globally, China's economy still spluttering a bit, still a war in Ukraine. I mean, how much geopolitical risk is there still for you right now out there?
Yeah, look, it's something we watch very closely because it's something that affects all businesses. China's economic situation is incredibly important to most Australian companies. They're a very important energy consumer, so what China does affects the price of our commodities. But then again, there's other externalities, things like war in the Middle East, war in the Ukraine, that also have significant effects on energy prices. So we watch all of these things very closely. At the end of the day, we control what we can control, which is making sure we're running our business safely, reliably, cost efficiently, and delivering on our investment programs.
And then inflation, it's been persistent for quite a few years now. Are you finally starting to see those pressures easing off?
I'm really pleased with how our team has managed those pressures. And if you look at our half-year results, one of the highlights is the fact that our unit production cost, half on half of last year, is down. And that's a testament to everybody in our business who is working hard every day to figure out how can I do my work more efficiently, how can I make sure that every dollar I spend is a dollar spent wisely. So I feel really good with how we've managed the inflationary pressures, but it's a constant battle.
Yeah, looking at your results, average realised prices down about 11%, production down slightly. Is that really the main reason for the fall in profit?
Yes. Our profit tracks commodity prices, so if we get less for the products we sell, then that has an immediate flow through to profit.
What's the outlook then for looking at prices potentially over the next 12, 24 months? Are things looking a bit better?
Look, as we look at natural gas prices, particularly for LNG, things are looking pretty positive. We're seeing Asian LNG prices looking pretty strong for the forward period. But again, it's something where a change in geopolitics or a change in China's economy or a change in the U.S. economy can have a ripple effect. So, we try not to get too complacent with the forward curves.
And then looking across the world, where are your biggest competitors located?
Look, we closely watch what's happening in the U.S., particularly in the LNG market. Right now, the world has 3 main LNG producers: the U.S., Qatar, and Australia. And the U.S. and Qatar continue to invest in growth, and that growth will be hitting the market in the next few years. So those are the parts of the world that we watch closely.
You've dropped your interest in Santos earlier this year, but do you feel like you need to be a bigger company to be competitive on the global stage?
Part of why we made the announced acquisition of Tellurian and the Driftwood LNG is that opportunity to continue to grow our LNG portfolio. So there's a lot of different ways to grow. With Tellurian, we've got a pretty affordable acquisition that gives us the potential to build up to 27.6 million tons per annum of LNG. And just for calibration, that's the size of Northwest Shelf plus Pluto plus the second train we're building at Pluto. So it's a very significant opportunity there, and that'll give us the growth that we're seeking in our LNG business.
We are seeing a lot of consolidation around the world. Do you think you're open to a potential takeover with someone tapping you?
Look, I think Woodside as a standalone company is a very attractive investment proposition. I think we're a very strong company as it stands today, and our goal is to continue to thrive as a standalone business.
We've seen speculation about Chevron potentially interested. You obviously work together on quite a few areas in Western Australia. Is there any sort of truth in that?
Look, I think it must have been a slow news day to revive some rumours that have been floating around for a while. Look, we've got close relationships with a number of other companies in our sector, and as I said, our goal is to thrive as a standalone business.
Last 6 months, this half year, you've progressed quite a few projects. Sangomar now producing oil. Just explain the significance of that.
Sangomar is really exciting because it's Senegal's first oil and gas development. It's a deepwater field. Was discovered less than a decade ago. So very pleased with Woodside's ability to develop the asset. We built the project during COVID, so our employees had to go through all sorts of challenges around overseeing and managing construction, which was global construction in China, in Europe, and then, of course, field execution in Africa. So really pleased with the work the team's done to be able to bring that project online. And we've started up smoothly. So often when you start up a new asset, sometimes you've got some bumps and setbacks. Really pleased we've hit nameplate capacity of 100,000 barrels of oil per day already in our first month.
Meg O'Neill, Chief Executive at Woodside, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Well, the latest Newspoll paints a pretty bleak picture for the Prime Minister personally, and really things on a knife edge overall. Let's take a look first of all, and also some of the patterns we're seeing here. Two-party preferred. You can see here what's not happening as much movement. So June 2024, 50-50 between the two parties. 51-49, that was a slight lead to Labor in July. August back to 50, September back to 50-50. In other words, this very even contest seems pretty set in. There's not a lot of movement going despite policy debates and so on. And on primary, when we pull that up, it's a similar situation. Very little variance. Even this is going back to February. Labor, their lowest in that time is 32% primary, their highest 34%. The Coalition 36-39. So not much is happening. Are there opinions that have set in? For now, at least, people are not really changing their minds. That does tend to happen in an election, but if you want, we're in a bit of a stalemate right at the moment. What would this mean then if it was 50-50 on election day with the uniform swing? These are the Labor seats we'd see at risk, or if the uniform swing happened, these are the ones that would go. Gilmore, Lyons, Lingiari, Bennelong. So these are all seats under the margin there of 2.5%. Then you get a couple more as well that would go. So Higgins, Robertson and Tangney. Now there's a possibility. Others go, of course. We're just applying uniform, and now we're saying there goes 7 seats from the Labor Party to the Coalition. What would that look like then in terms of the overall parliament and how that would set up? All this talk of minority parliament. This is why 76 needed for a majority. If that swing happened, Labor's way off. The Coalition is even further off. This assumes those teal seats are still in teal hands, so none go to the Coalition. But look, even if they pick up a couple, that wouldn't be a bad result. They're still way off, and that assumes Labor, all those seats that they were contesting with the Greens last time, stay in Green hands. Now, there are more under threat than the Greens, so maybe Labor's a touch lower. The point here is this is as deep into minority parliament as you could get right now at the moment with these polls. I'm sure both sides will start using that in the next few months as well if they feel as though they can get the upper hand. So what about the leaders? This is net satisfaction. Anthony Albanese versus Peter Dutton. This is just post the election, July, plus 35 to Albanese, minus 4% to Peter Dutton. A year later, plus 11 for Anthony Albanese. So he's still relatively popular, and Peter Dutton's lost a lot of bark, if you like. What happens then is the concern for Labor. Anthony Albanese goes to minus 10. That's after the referendum was lost. At this stage, Peter Dutton, you'll notice he doesn't really move, so it's more about the Albanese side. He levels back up to 0% only a few months ago after that budget, now back down to -13. This is not where he wants to be as Prime Minister, level with Peter Dutton. Why do I say that? Let's look at the history, if you like, of the net satisfaction of a Prime Minister versus an opposition leader. 2018, Bill Shorten was favourite for the election. This is just on the election, or this is 8 months out, I should say, the same period we're at right now. Scott Morrison +2, Bill Shorten -14. We know how that ended up in the end. Then we go to here, 0% versus -9% for Albanese, so that's closer. What that does show is you can close this contest a lot in the last few months. This can bounce around, but look at the favoured element of incumbency there, how much Anthony Albanese was behind, and now he's on the level with Peter Dutton. So for all the talk of how divisive they say Peter Dutton is, Anthony Albanese is now at these same levels effectively. What about election eve? How much does this change? Because people say, don't look at this measure too much. This is the measure right on the election eve, the final Newspoll before the last two elections. As you can see in 2019, it was an indicator. We might not have looked at it much, but this was an indicator. Bill Shorten was still unpopular and it was a factor. Then we fast forward to the next election. Scott Morrison was deeply unpopular and that clearly weighed on the Liberal ticket. Anthony Albanese was not popular and he hasn't been. And this is the caveat to all of this. He hasn't been a very popular leader, but -5 is a lot better than -13. And once you're Prime Minister and making decisions, the idea is you can actually get some credit with voters. Right now, that's clearly not happening. So this will be a close watch as we lead up towards the election. Let's go now to the Assistant Minister, to the Prime Minister, Patrick Gorman, for his take on all of this. He loves commenting on polls. Patrick, good to have your company today. We've seen this through a lot of polls.
Good to be
Why
here, Tom.
do you think the Prime Minister right now is not all that popular with voters?
Well, as you know, Tom, polls are made up of the survey responses of thousands and thousands of people. They'll all have different reasons as to why they choose various things. But what I know, as the member for Perth, as the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister, is actually, it's not about us, it's about the people we serve. And it's about whether or not we are doing the things that they expect us to do. When we do have a very challenging economic situation here in Australia, in large part caused by global volatility and global inflation, are we doing the things that people expect us to do? And what I know when I go to the Kayela markets or the Dads and Donuts in Morley on the weekend, that people recognise that we are doing the responsible thing, that is helping people with their household budgets without adding to inflation. That's a challenging path for any government to walk right now, and that's what we'll continue to do. Because like I said, Tom, the polls are one thing, but it's actually not about myself or any other member of Parliament. It's about the people we serve.
Is there an element of Labor getting really desperate to attack Peter Dutton? Because the latest attack ads are all to do with where you are out west and him apparently having these secret plans to change the GST redistribution, which my unofficial role as sort of people out in the west, we think it's a bit crazy, but he's backed it. He's clearly backed it since the election. So this is just not true, this campaign, is it?
Tom, from my point of view, there is nothing new about me being very critical of Peter Dutton's history when it comes to the GST. I've said it on your program before. I've written opinion pieces about this for more than a year. What we know, and this is where this all comes from, is that it was revealed in 2018 that Peter Dutton opposed the WA GST deal when it was being debated at Cabinet. Now, Malcolm Turnbull put that in his book, but it's not just Malcolm Turnbull. Obviously, you know, he's been pretty critical of Mr Dutton over the years. He's called him a thug and all the rest. Julie Bishop, Ken Wyatt, Scott Morrison have all said that Peter Dutton is a risk to the WA GST deal. I think it's reasonable that voters know that there is this risk at play when it comes to Mr Dutton, and we saw it yesterday. I was watching 7 a.m. here in Perth, watching another network, and there I found one of Peter Dutton's rising star frontbenchers out there saying they're going to start World War III with the states when it comes to the GST arrangements. Now,
let's just be wary
of
this.
I'm not making this up.
That's conflating that with the WA deal. You're not making it up. He said on the table was withholding GST if they didn't build housing quickly enough. That's not a WA GST redistribution, is it?
Well, WA is part of the Commonwealth last time I checked, so if they're talking about dialing down WA's GST, then that affects us as much as it does any other state.
But not the deal. Not the special deal that was done by a coalition government that Labor's now in lockstep on.
Yeah. And the person who was sitting around the Cabinet table questioning that deal was Peter Dutton. And he's never explained it. He's never explained why he took that policy position. He's never explained why he then potentially has had different views over time. And, frankly, when it comes to WA getting a fair share of the GST, I don't trust Peter Dutton. Simple as that.
Well, I'm sure why was because it's the richest state in Australia, and why he changed his mind. There are lots of seats up for grabs, which is why both sides are agreeing on it. Anyway, there's my little 10 seconds. It's my show, I guess, Pat. Every now and then I can rant on.
It's your show, Tom.
Rate rises. Rate rises. Smashing the economy, says the Treasurer. Impossible to miss this wording, wasn't it? He's a bit frustrated, Jim Chalmers.
Well, I'll leave you to comment on the temperament of the Treasurer. I actually find that he is someone who is incredibly focused on the job that we have at hand. That focus is on doing what we can do in fiscal policy to bring down inflation. I know that, last month we saw here in the West, people getting the first of their $700 electricity bill credits, putting downward pressure on inflation, supporting households. I think what the Treasurer is reflecting is that we know that people are doing it tough. We know that their household budgets are under pressure. I think it's appropriate that we actually talk about what is happening to people in the communities which we serve. But
we always know politicians choose their words carefully. So this is the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, where he said very carefully, calculated notes, talking points, whatever you like, put out there, that these rate rises are smashing the economy. That's a shift, isn't it?
I think I've seen a number of pieces of commentary and articles by the Treasurer over time talking about the real pressure that global inflation is putting onto households, the real pressure that volatility is putting onto households, and just the reality that, of course, when you've got interest rates that have gone up as high and as fast as they have, that puts pressure on people. I mean, he's the Treasurer of Australia. Of course, he sees that in the work that we do every day. What we've done is where we can is to provide relief. We saw yesterday details of what's going to happen when it comes to lifting pension payments and getting more rent assistance to those who are doing the toughest. They're the things that are our responsibility. We'll keep taking responsibility, but I'm not going to sit here, and the Treasurer is not going to sit here and pretend that we don't know that people are doing it really tough, and that the domestic and global circumstances we find ourselves in are putting pressure on people. That's why we're acting. That's why we're doing things. That's why we're making sure where we can, we provide tax relief, assistance payments, or smart, sensible policy, like things like assisting with the cost of childcare.
All right. Well, I know it's a busy day over there, all sorts of ministers in the PM there, so we always appreciate you fitting us in. Patrick,
it's always good to have people in the West. Tom, you are welcome anytime.
Fire emergency warning at Tomago, which is near Newcastle, the site of Australia's largest aluminium smelter. The out-of-control fire is right on the edge of the smelter property, heading in an easterly direction. 101 hectares has already been burnt, and authorities say those in the area should seek shelter. It's too late to leave. The fire is close to the New South Wales headquarters of Caterpillar machinery distributor Westrac, controlled by the Stokes family. So we'll keep an eye on that one for you as well.
Let's get straight into this Newspoll with our political editor, Andrew Connel. He's here at the desk with me. It's interesting because it's the same narrative in almost every poll that we see. A dwindling primary vote for Labor. It's kind of steady, around the low 30s, but the approval rating of both leaders, not great. I do think this is worse for Anthony Albanese, though.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's in government, so you'd say that, but it is a hung parliament poll, isn't it? I mean, if the poll says a pox on both houses, guess what you end up with? A hung parliament. Have a look at this, though. I'm going to show you the number of seats that Labor would lose under this poll, OK? They would lose about 6 or 7. So I'm saying they were sort of in the low 52s. We're talking two-party preferred now. It's a bit harder with the teal seats to go two-party preferred. Now they're at 50. So you're losing all of these, and then go to the second page. One of these has been abolished, Higgins. So I think they've been given an additional one nominally. So let's say they lose 6 seats. They're at 72. But there are a couple of seats where if they just fell another %, they'd lose and be 70. And then the coalition, of course, they're looking at sort of early 60s numbers then. They're only 62, 63.
So they need the Teals to form government.
They do, because they won't use the Greens And Rebecca Sharkey and Bob Katter, you doubt would go with them. Wilkie would go with them probably, but then do they have to promise him something? So inevitably, you're looking at a situation where the Teals and Wilkie give them confidence and supply, but no formal deal. Di will go with the Lib. She's a Lib, I would say.
Can we just bring up those graphics again to see the seats that would be lost under this Newspoll? Is there a direct transfer here from Labor to the Libs? I mean, the Libs would have to pick up something like Bennelong, surely.
Yes, and Labor tells me they're ahead in Bennelong.
Yeah, that'd all be direct transfers. Let's go to the next page quickly.
This is kind of illustrative.
Higgins is gone. Robertson's
a tough fight. He's a good candidate. So but it's illustrative more than anything because you could pick up a 5% seat and keep a 2.5% seat. But my experience covering elections is roughly that number translates uniformly. It might not be the exact same seats, but it's the same number.
Yeah.
So, you know, early 70s, that's what we're looking at. Tell me how the government's numbers improve. Only if Peter Dutton falls over in the campaign.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Either way.
More likely Labor.
You know what? I think so too. But you know what really frustrated me at the last election with the advent of the Teals, and it was their first election. They were given the benefit of the doubt. I get all that. I think there needs to be a big shift and change in attitude when we're looking at, you know, minority governments for the foreseeable future. The Teals and the Independents need to be put on the spot before the election. In the event of minority government, who are you supporting? They're like, oh no, we're going to wait and see, wait things up. It's, you know, borderline dodgy because they're going to wait to see what they're promised by each major party. Well, and I know that's how politics has been done in the past, but that is not a great way to be governing.
Why should they commit when they don't know the result? They don't know how many numbers of seats, which side?
Because they know the policies that are on the table.
Well, that's probably fair.
And you can put all those scenarios to them. I mean,
if you have Labor with 71 seats and Dutton with 62, and you want government formed, you have no choice.
Well, sure, in that scenario.
That's the scenario we're looking at.
That's the scenario we're looking at. But if it's a lot closer than that.
Well, that's the key. So Dutton's job obviously is to get it up to 2 or 3%.
To be able to lay out that scenario and articulate that, just like we are.
Yeah.
They're having their discussions behind the scenes. For sure, or there will be at least.
Well, you know, all I can say is if we do get early 70s for Labor, they'd be odds on to lose the next one because that's what we've seen in history. Because everything falls apart in a hung parliament, and then Peter Dutton has to spend 6 years as opposition leader, maybe 5, and then he's the Prime Minister. So if you ask me who's the most likely next Prime Minister after Anthony Albanese, some people would say Jim Chalmers. I'd say the way the polls are going, it's Peter Dutton. It just might not be in 9 months' time.
No. I think it's really hard for any government to get 3 terms, even in minority. But anyway, let's look at Labor and their online gambling regulator. Now, it's not on the cards because even though it's a major recommendation, what's happened here?
So Peter Murphy, all the attention's gone on this gambling advertising recommendation. We already know that's going to get watered down. Which for us in the television industry, we probably don't disagree with that much because media has to make money from some ads, but it'll be good to see it scaled back, declaring my interest there. But there's also another recommendation from this Peter Murphy committee for a national regulator. And Amanda Rishworth, the Social Services Minister, said, look, she's prepared a package and that's not in there. And I find that pretty extraordinary, really, because you would expect them to at least establish that national online gambling regulator. Let's have a listen to Amanda Rishworth. Will you be setting up that regulator and what would their role be?
Obviously, any national regulator would involve states and territories handing over their powers to the Commonwealth. So, look, we are working, as Minister, I'm working very closely with my state and territory counterparts to look at what we can do in a coordinated fashion.
Do you think they'll hand over those powers?
I do think they will do it. Oh, no, I'm not suggesting they would hand over those powers. What I'm suggesting is in the essence of that recommendation was about better national coordination. That's at the heart of the recommendation.
Would you like to see that national regulator and would gambling companies be levied to pay for it?
I have been working very well with my state and territory counterparts. They have, we have together brought in a number of reforms, really important reforms, and have worked really closely together.
I just want to briefly ask you again, do you think there'll be a national regulator set up? Yes or no?
Well, look, look, at this point, that is not in the discussions with states and territories.
Okay, we kind of eventually got there.
Took a while.
Almost a no, not sure.
That is a no.
Yeah, straight answer, kind of. Anyway, let's look at the coalition. They want Senate hearings into the government's university caps.
Yeah,
Not a bad idea.
It's pretty obvious they're going to have to come up with a bigger cap. And they said, we will come up with our own cap yesterday. But they won't tell us it's a lower cap than Labor's. So they say that the government's doing this under a bit of a cloak of secrecy. Every uni's got its own cap. But I thought what else was interesting in this interview with the opposition's education spokeswoman, Sarah Henderson, is her anecdotes, which ring true to me, because I've heard similar, about an entire tutorial being held in Mandarin, about a student having to hold up a phone with Google Translate on the phone to understand what the tutor was saying in a university. Now, is this the university system we want? I think the government's got a point with the caps. It's all about how it's implemented, I guess, because Sydney Uni, 50% foreign students, I don't think is what Sydney Uni was established for. Here was Sarah Henderson yesterday.
Australian students are sitting in lecture theatres. 75% of the students are foreign. They're divided in terms of their work. They can't work together. Even foreign students are using Google Translate. They're holding their phone up to a lecturer to understand what's going on. There was the story a few weeks ago about a young first-year commerce student at Melbourne Uni. He's just left commerce because his entire tutorial was basically being spoken in Mandarin, including from the tutor. The occasional bit of English here and there, but every other student in his class was a foreign student. They were all speaking in Mandarin, and he was just in despair. He couldn't learn, and that is not good enough.
But how widespread do you think those stories are?
I think they're pretty widespread. Talking to people after that was played, I had a couple of people who've been students in universities talk to me about people who can't speak English in their classes, including journalism classes, and I've heard that before.
How does that affect them?
Well, it's a joke, isn't it? I mean, if you're an Australian trying to get into a journalism course, for our profession, for example, or I had a journalism politics double major, you need to work your butt off to get a certain mark. If you're from a low socio-economic status, you've got less of a chance of getting there. Yeah. If you're from a public school, you've got less chance of getting there. But don't worry, if you're from China and can't speak English, just hand over 70K and you're at university. That's not how we get to be a clever country. That's how we get to be a dumb country.
I agree with you. I think there is an over-reliance on university. This is another argument we can have another time, whether journalism needs to be in universities and is more of a vocation and a trade. Look, that's an argument we can have another time. But in the end, universities are our second biggest export. It's the only thing we don't dig out of the ground. Yes, there's an over-reliance on foreign students, but this is a blunt instrument. We're not just talking about University of Sydney, right? We're talking about James Cook University in Townsville. We're talking about...
They're lifting the regional numbers. They're lifting the regional numbers. 78% they claim.
On figures 5 years ago.
Well, if you ask most Australians if they think 270,000 new international students a year is enough for Australia, I think they'd say yes.
I think so too, but I don't think the argument that it's dramatically affecting the housing market is where it's at. I think that's a furphy. Especially when you look at South Australia. I mean, Peter Malinowskis just 2 weeks ago said, hang on, it's not a housing issue where we are, we've got 10% vacancy for student accommodation.
There you go.
So that's a bit of a political lie that's convenient for both major parties.
I think that's probably true, but I still think we've got to stop 500,000 net migration a year.
I do as well, but to do this in such a blunt way, where are these universities finding that money? And there's no solution being offered from the government. If you don't have, if you're losing $14 million a year at a regional university because you're not having these students, that affects research and development, that affects productivity, that affects a pipeline of jobs going into the economy. So we can't sit here and pretend like, this blunt instrument doesn't have a huge effect.
I'm starting to wonder if I'm talking to Laura Jays or Mark Scott. Look, the government's argument is...
not Mark Scott.
The government's... no, sorry to insult you. Look, the government's... I used to work for Mark Scott. The government's argument is that the regional unis, they're lifting the numbers. Whether that actually occurs, I guess, is the big test. And if the group of 8 can take a haircut, they're at least held at that level. That's a good thing. I will say one thing. Jason Clare's on Sunday. I'll test him out on it.
Okay, good. For example, Harvard, would they have a huge amount of international students?
I'll go and find out.
Okay.
Got me on
Putting
the
you
spot
on the spot there. But, I mean, my point is...
Here's Dr. Google.
I don't think Australia would be alone in having a huge amount...
50%?
Well, I don't know.
That's a very good question. Okay. That's an appropriate question.
Should we pick it up another time?
Yeah, I'll send you a text. You can tell the viewer. All right?
Okay, thanks, Andrew. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Let's go live to Bruce Hawker now. He's an advisor with Fitzpatrick and Company. He's been a long-time Labor advisor. Close links in the Democratic Party as well in the United States. Bruce, I want to ask you about the latest in the Trump-Harris race in a moment. Let's start with the polling at home, though. What would be your advice to the Albanese camp? What do they need to do to try and shift the momentum right now? Is it all about interest rates? Do they just need to see a cut or two?
Well, it's largely about interest rates. That's absolutely right. And that's a message that they have to be pushing through all the time, Kieran, that interest rates need to come down. And once they do, they'll be in a better position to manage the economy, that the families out there will be in a better position to do so as well. But what we are seeing are issues which are diverting the government from those key messages. And what Labor, I think, really needs to just double down on doing is making sure that issues like Gaza and other extraneous matters, which Australia's got no control over, have to be pushed to one side so they can focus on that key message.
Peter Dutton has been very disciplined, effective in a number of areas. Certainly, I don't think it's a small thing to say he's united his party off the back of in a first term. So that's a big achievement in itself, but also in terms of his messaging. And I think you'd be deluded to say he's unelectable. That is wrong. And so, do you see a scenario where the Times could suit Peter Dutton? The hard man in national security, but that might be what people want right now in terms of their leadership.
Well, the question is whether that's a vote-changing issue, Kieran. People generally respond positively to comments for tighter controls over immigration and tougher attitudes towards refugees, etc., etc. That's not really in question. The question is really, is this something which is going to change people's minds? And right now, as I've said before, I don't think people are really focused on those issues in the mainstream as much as people on the periphery of the political process are. So it's in his interest to keep raising those interests, to keep talking about Gaza and other defence-related issues all the time. But as far as the electorate's concerned, the real question is interest rates and inflation. And as you'll see from that Newspoll that came out just today, they don't really think that he's got any answers around the question of inflation. And that's a problem for him because he really has to be proving to people that he would be a better economic manager, would make the lives of average families better.
On the United States now, Donald Trump, he has been trying to find a line of length against Harris. Has he got there yet? And where are the polls right now? Is it still very much a toss-up with a couple of months to go?
Oh, it's definitely a toss-up. The polls, some polls show Harris ahead, 50 to 46 or some numbers like that. I don't see it as high as that. And what you really have to be looking at what are happening in the swing states. That's states like Georgia and Pennsylvania and Nevada and so forth. There's about 7 states there where this election is going to be decided. And in all of those states, it's on a knife edge. You couldn't put a cigarette paper between Harris and Trump in states like Pennsylvania. So I think we're going to see a lot more action between now and the first Tuesday in November when the election is held. And we're going to see concentrated energy in those key swing states where they really have to win over the support of just a small number of people in order to win the Electoral College vote. And that's what it all comes down to, the Electoral College. And at the moment, though, Harris is doing well. And you compare it to the sense of foreboding that there was amongst and depression in the Democratic Party ranks before Biden stood down as the candidate. And now it's remarkably different, and momentum and enthusiasm are very important aspects of any campaign, most particularly presidential ones.
Yeah, because of the voluntary voting, it's so important to have that momentum and sense of enthusiasm to get people to go to the ballot box. We spoke and we've spoken at length about that first debate. It had a different Democratic candidate, though, of course, Joe Biden. We know how that all went. The next debate will be one of the most anticipated in US history.
It will indeed. And I mean, I'll be watching. I think a lot of people in Australia will, because it's in our interest to know what's going on in the United States as well. And I think Harris will spend a lot of time preparing for that debate. She will be grilled uphill and down dale by her advisors. They will be rehearsing. They'll have people playing various roles, including that of Trump. They'll throw every curly, offensive question at her that they can to try to throw her off. They'll throw minutiae at her. All the sorts of things that a good campaign does when it's preparing for a debate. It happens in Australia. You know, prime ministers and premiers will take themselves out of the campaign for a couple of days for key debates to make sure that they are right across all the issues. That's exactly what will happen here. Now, Trump tends not to do that. He tends to fly by the seat of his pants because that's part of the appeal, and he's not held to the same standards as other candidates are when it comes to bold and sweeping statements. So he may not do that, but she certainly will, and a lot's going to come down to how people respond to Harris in that debate. Does she have what it takes to be the next president of the United States? It's a big question. It's a big test. It's the biggest test in the world.
Yes, it is indeed. And you're right, we'll be watching it and we'll be covering it at length right here on Sky News, as always. Bruce, great to get your insights. Thanks so much, as always.
Thanks, Kieran.